Good evening. Thanks very much for joining us on the CNBC TV 18 special broadcast. In a speech titled On the Importance of Independent Regulatory Institutions, the Case of the Central Bank, RBI Deputy Governor Viral Acharya has argued the need to protect the independence of a central bank to protect the economy from what he calls short-termism. Now, this is a 15-page speech that the Deputy Governor Viral Acharya has made. But what is pertinent to point out, and that goes straight to page number 11, is the title, Ongoing Challenges in Maintaining the Independence of the Reserve Bank of India. Let me quote for the benefit of our viewers very quickly what the Deputy Governor says. He says, few important pockets of persistent weakness, however, remain in maintaining the independence of the Reserve Bank. Right on the top, the regulation of public sector banks. This is not new. The Reserve Bank has repeatedly said that they do not enjoy the same ability to regulate public sector banks as they do private sector banks. A reiteration coming in here by Viral Acharya. And I'm quoting from what he says. One important limitation is that the Reserve Bank is statutorily limited in undertaking the full scope of actions against public sector banks, such as asset divestiture, replacement of management and board, license revocation, resolution actions such as mergers or sales, all of which it can and does deploy effectively in case of private banks. So reiterating the case for more regulatory oversight when it comes to public sector banks. Second, the Reserve Bank's balance sheet strength. He says, and I quote again, having adequate reserves to bear any losses that arise from a central bank's operations and having appropriate rules to allocate profits is considered an important part of central bank's independence from the government. I quote again, a thorny ongoing issue on this front has been that of the rules for surplus transfer from the Reserve Bank to the government, an issue that relates closely to the leading Argentine example in my introductory remarks. It has been covered deftly by Rakesh Mohan, and we'll speak with Mr. Mohan in a second, but the Reserve Bank's balance sheet strength has been put down as the second ongoing challenge that the Reserve Bank faces. And the third, I quote again, regulatory scope. A final issue is one of regulatory scope. The most recent case in point being the recommendation to bypass the central bank's powers over payment and settlements by appointing a separate payments regulator. The Reserve Bank has published its dissent note against these recommendations on the 19th of October. Latha, I've tried to very quickly summarize the three ongoing challenges that Viral Acharya has put forward in this rather long speech that he's made when he talks about the need for independent regulatory institutions.
Well, I think the introduction is equally important. You've put the current issues on the table. If Dr. Rakesh Mohan is listening, I'll just give the backdrop. Dr. Acharya builds a case for central bank independence by pointing out to 2 or 3 cases in history where countries paid dearly for not abiding by the independence of their central banks. The first is the case of Argentina, which you read out, Shereen. In the introductory note, Argentina, the government in 2010 asked the Argentinian central bank to hand over a large part of its forex reserves to clear its domestic debt. And the central bank governor resigned, and in a matter of months, the interest rate on Argentinian yields went up by 250 basis points. In fact, the Argentinian reserves in the US central bank or in the US commercial banks was seized by the government because they feared Argentina will not pay what is due to foreign investors since the central bank's independence was snatched. And then, of course, Argentina followed with 300% inflation, and the pattern has repeated. More recently, Dr. Acharya refers to what happened in Turkey, where the central bank was dictated to not hike rates in the face of rising inflation. And you know what happened to the Turkish currency. It's too recent in our memory. So he points to say that central bank independence helps actually macroeconomic stability, and the lack of it results in a huge payment that the economy makes both on the foreign exchange front and in domestic policies. He goes on to say, the other point he makes is that why do all countries have independent central banks? Because government of the day is usually a short-term vision-oriented government, whereas you need a longer-term vision, and that's why you have a central bank, which is usually filled with academics, with experts, not people from the commercial segment, as it were, and certainly not from politics. laying down this context, he goes on to these three issues. And I think he's obviously pointing out to the fact that there is tremendous pressure to reduce the prompt and corrective action rules. And of course, previously, Urjit Patel has spoken about how the RBI has no power over the boards of public sector banks, over the CEOs. They can't dismiss them. Only the government can dismiss them. The second part is, last year, for the first time, the government forced an interim dividend out of the Reserve Bank. There was an initial dividend given, a later dividend of 10,000 crore was given, which normally has never been done. It appears that since he has raised that issue of Reserve Bank's balance sheet, maybe the government is again gunning for an interim dividend. And I think Subhash Chandra Garg made that point, that now interim dividend has become a rule or has become a trend. So it appears that that is what they're fighting against. This was not known to us, and it looks like now that battle is also there. And third, as you mentioned, a payment regulator which takes out a large chunk of area from the Reserve Bank and gives it to an entity which will be headed by someone appointed by the government, and that inevitably could lead to truncating the independence of the central bank and of the governor. Well, Dr. Rakesh Mohan is with us, Shereen, so let me pose the first question to him. Dr. Mohan, you are specifically quoted on the issue of balance sheet strength. Your recent article, which was published, I think, in the Business Standard, Protect the Reserve Bank's Balance Sheet. What would you have to say? The angling for an interim dividend is a dangerous trend, you would say?
Yeah, I wrote a three-part series
yes,
in the Business Standard. I think it was about a month ago, maybe 3 weeks ago.
Yes, sir.
And the context is basically that the Reserve Bank, all things considered, has had a very good history over its existence since 1935, of being essentially autonomous. And there's been a great degree of respect for the Reserve Bank from the government. It's only in recent times that there has been, in some sense, a pretty constant onslaught on the Reserve Bank, not just the last couple of years, but over 10 years or so. And that is what had moved me to write those articles, because I feel that it's very, very important for the economy of the country, for financial stability in the country, that the central bank, the Reserve Bank, must be protected from temporary issues that may be seen of some importance by the government of the day. So I do think that particularly these issues, the one, for example, this issue of the Payments and Settlement System Regulator.
Yes.
I had actually looked in great detail on what are the systems in other countries, and there are very good collections of articles, manual in fact, from the Bank for International Settlements, that in almost every major country, it is indeed the central bank that is given the legal regulatory powers of the payment settlement systems. So that's actually a very core function of central banks. Just like currency is a core function of central banks, I just understand what is the provocation for the government to suggest that the payment and settlement system should be taken out of the Reserve Bank's ambit. It's a real mystery to me. And as I said, I've looked at systems in other countries. In the U.S., of course, because their general regulatory system is quite fragmented. Even there, the main responsibility is indeed with the Federal Reserve, but it is somewhat more fragmented in other countries. But almost every other country, the responsibility rests with the central bank.
You know, Dr. Mohan, a deputy governor of a later year is with us, Mr. H.R. Khan. And Mr. Khan, you were part of the Watal committee. And the Watal committee actually recommended that the payment regulator should be housed in the Reserve Bank and obviously, therefore, de facto, headed by the governor. But that's not how the recommendations of the committee ultimately look. The Committee on Payments Act has housed the regulator outside. Do you think this is dangerous? Your comments on both the speech and the event about which the speech is talking.
No, I just don't know the background. What is the context you're talking about?
Well, Viral Acharya, oh, I'm so sorry. Viral Acharya today has made a speech, probably still speaking. It's put on the central bank website. It is titled On the Importance of Independent Regulatory Institutions, the Case of the Central Bank. He has made a strong pitch for central bank independence and pointed out the dangers in Argentina and Turkey when central bank independence was curtailed. And he says in the last 2 pages that there are 3 issues where central bank independence is still being challenged. One of them, of course, is the control over public sector banks. The second one is in terms of debt is in terms of the dividend that is garnered and therefore balance sheet of the Reserve Bank not being entirely protected. And third, which is the most important, the payment regulator now being recommended to be taken out of the central bank and kept as an independent regulator. Since you were in the Vatal committee, I was asking you, what would your comments be? Do you think the central bank independence is under threat here?
No, so far as the payment system part is concerned, I just heard what my senior colleague, Dr. Rakesh Mohan, was just speaking. And most countries, it is the central bank because it's a continuum from currency to bank, because the bank-dominated payment system, currency is another mode of payment, a lot of implications for monetary policy system. So, natural way it should come to central bank payment system regulation. But what has happened in the recent past, a lot of dynamics have happened in the payment system space, partly because of a lot of non-banks are trying to get into that, and there is a perception, I think not fully correct, that non-banks are not getting the right type of incentive. There is no competition, there is no innovation, which is happening because the payment system regulator is bank-oriented. So I think that is perhaps the trigger to suggest for this independent payment regulator. But I think the problem may be partly true, but the solution suggested is not the right way of looking at it. We can create a structure where there will be more consultation, more players come into the picture, and we create a scope for competition and innovation. That no way is impossibility under central bank framework. But having said that, let me also add, having seen the structure from inside, we need a lot of capacity building, whatever institution who handles this payment system regulation. So I think that part also we should keep in mind.
Sure. No, fair point, sir, but you are in agreement with what has been stated by the Deputy Governor Viral Acharya when he talks about the RBI's dissent on taking the payments, keeping the payment system regulator outside of the Reserve Bank. But Dr. Mohan, let me come to the other ongoing challenge, to use Viral Acharya's words that he mentions. Right, and he talks about the Reserve Bank's balance sheet strength, sir. So let me quote to you exactly what the RBI DG says. He says, a thorny ongoing issue on this front has been that the rules for surplus transfers from the Reserve Bank to the government, an issue that relates closely to the leading Argentine example in my introductory remarks. And then, of course, he goes on to quote you, but essentially saying that this is a thorny issue and this is clearly a cause for concern as far as the Reserve Bank goes.
It is indeed a very important cause for concern. One very simple point is that if you do an interim dividend, just as a matter of a factual issue, if you do an interim dividend, all it means is that you will do a lower final dividend. And therefore, there's actually no net increase in the resources of the government.
And this is way more serious, sir. This is way more serious.
I know, it is much more serious.
They have quoted a news article saying that the government has pegged RBI's excess capital at 3.6 lakh crore and is seeking that as a surplus.
I was coming to that.
Sure, sir, please.
Even when you sort of say there's an excess capital with the central bank, and suppose you then transfer that capital in whatever methodology that you decide to transfer that capital, it just would mean that you'll have lower the assets of the assets of the central bank would also have to come down correspondingly. As a consequence, in future years you will get a lower dividend. So this is just forwarding the transfer resources from the central bank to the government. So once again, that doesn't make any sense. But much more importantly, it provides a signal to the market of instability and disrespect for the central bank, and the government not understanding the functions of the central bank, also not understanding the value of the central bank's balance sheet and why it has to be there, why it has to be strong, and therefore it can have very, very serious consequences. And so the most important thing really is that it is giving a signal to the market that the government does not respect its own central bank, and that it is even willing to raid its balance sheets.
Absolutely.
Which is always a very, very, very dangerous signal. And the examples, of course, that Dr. Acharya has given, particularly of Argentina, are something that the government must be conscious of. You also have to remember that the foreign exchange reserves of the Reserve Bank of India today are less than than India's overall foreign debt, that is government plus private sector debt. So there's in no way can it be said that that the Reserve Bank's reserves are too high.
Yes.
So these are all kind of misconceptions somehow the government has, and these are very, very dangerous trends for the government to demonstrate this kind of action towards its own central bank.
Yeah, so actually it's extremely worrisome. I wasn't aware, Shereen, if you were, that the government actually thinks 3.6 lakh crore of RBI's capital has to be transferred as a surplus. This is not interim dividend. This is taking away the capital of the central bank. And, you know, first of all, it is even in market terms a very difficult thing. The Reserve Bank doesn't hold 3.5 lakh rupees as rupees. 3.5 lakh crore in the form of cash. They are held in government securities or in dollars. How the hell will they sell so many dollars? If they sell that many dollars, just imagine the impact on the exchange rate, or for that matter, government bonds.
Yes. No, let's. I'm just going to temper that, Latha, because you know this is a news article that Viral Acharya is referring to. We don't know whether this is in fact the intention of the government to go after the capital. But this is Viral Acharya referring to a news article.
No, Viral Acharya quoting that article gives it an importance. You know, if it was that out of the imagination of governments, then maybe the Deputy Governor may not have quoted it. I'm giving it sanctity because the Deputy Governor is giving it sanctity. And if it is indeed a thought, then it's dangerous.
No, I
just wanted me to talk to them right now.
I agree. Let me go across to Mr. H.R. Khan to get his comments on this. The concern being raised by Viral Acharya on the Reserve Bank's balance sheet strength, one that's being echoed here by Dr. Rakesh Mohan as well. Mr. Khan, a quick comment from you on that.
There's one point also which we should keep in mind. India is a perpetually fiscally deficit country. And if there is a problem, there is no backstop available from the central government. So that is the context one has to keep in mind when you say that whether RBI is overcapitalized or not. Having said that, also let us be a little more pragmatic. I think this issue of dividend distribution, this is not in India. In many countries it happens. Yes. But in India, for the last, to my knowledge, last 7-8 years, this drama is being played on and played on and played on. I have no shame. I think there must be some mechanism to come out, some understanding that this is the way the dividend will be distributed between the government and RBI. Otherwise, every year, at least, I have undergone this process 5 years or 6 years. Every year, this drama goes on. I think we must come to some understanding that this is the way the dividend has to be worked out, and this is the minimum economic capital you should have, because you have to handle the market risk, liquidity risk, and systemic stability risk to be handled. And government is perpetually fiscally deficit. So keeping all factors in view, I think we need to have some consensus built over time to see that this issue doesn't look nice, that every now and then we talk about this. How much government should be taking, how much government should not be taking. This is one aspect. The second aspect also, I think RBI also has to be a little bit pragmatic. There is a component inside the buffer which is for systemic risk management. I think once in a while when there is a real need, I am again telling real need, that buffer needs to be used. not necessarily to transfer to the government, to be used for financial stability. And the third point, when the government is talking about taking the dividend, I think we have to talk about intergenerational issue, which Dr. Mohan mentioned. I think we must create a dividend smoothing fund so that in 1 year you don't give 60,000, next year you give 40,000. So there is a mechanism for staggered dividend distribution so that it is smoothened. It's not, there are not tops and neutrals. I think these are some of the areas I think we need to keep in mind. And most importantly, I think government and RBI should come to some consensus in terms of what is that targeted buffer and what is the mechanism for distribution of dividend over a period of time in a staggered manner.
Okay. Mr. Mohan, I think, is back with us. Dr. Mohan, your thoughts, if indeed the story is true, that the government is asking 3.6 lakh crore from RBI's capital, your thoughts, sir? I mean, it's mind-boggling. I'm getting goosebumps.
First, I would prefer not to believe it.
Okay. Okay.
I can't imagine that one can contemplate such an action. And second, as in, I've addressed this issue in my article in the Business Standard 3 or 4 weeks back, that this signifies a real attack from the government on its own central bank. And after all, if one looks at it on a broader basis, the central bank and the government obviously have a joint balance sheet, but nonetheless, there's a great value attached to the country, the international observers, the market, having respect and confidence in the central bank of any country. And the Reserve Bank of India has indeed enjoyed a very, very high degree of confidence in the world and, of course, within the country. And these kind of attacks have not taken place in the past. And therefore, it's very, very important for the government and the central bank to be on the same page and for everyone to understand that the government respects and has full confidence in the central bank. And if I may add that given the kind of volatility that the world is experiencing in financial markets right now, the volatility that our own currency the rupee has experienced in the last month or so, these are the kind of actions that can really damage the reputation of the country. And therefore, it's nothing less than the reputation of the country that is at stake. And I would hope that these kind of reports that you mentioned are basically not true. And the government, I cannot believe the government would be contemplating such an action.
Well, we have tried to reach out to the government, and as I point out, and I'm pointing this out again for the benefit of our viewers, this is a report that the RBI Deputy Governor is quoting in his speech. We have not independently verified this, but we have sought a comment from the government. But Dr. Mohan and Mr. Khan, quick final comments from you, and I'll start with you, Dr. Mohan. The fact that here is the RBI Deputy Governor speaking very plainly and very openly about what the Reserve Bank seems to think are the ongoing challenges in maintaining the independence of the Reserve Bank, and these are the 3 issues that have been brought up. We've already seen the dissent note, for instance, on the payment regulator being put forward and being reiterated by the Reserve Bank. What do you make of, A, the fact that this is the speech that Viral Acharya has made in this fashion and raised these issues today?
Well, let me again mention that I had written this 3-part series of the Business Standard 4 weeks back. And as you know, I have generally restrained myself from writing on and commenting on government RBI issues ever since I retired from the Reserve Bank in 2009. It is only because I had observed some of these trends that I felt it was important to write those pieces. And in that sense, I suppose that Dr. Acharya is of similar and stronger view, given that he's inside. Because I'm obviously not au fait with all the developments within the government and the Reserve Bank. But as now an external observer, I had felt disturbed enough some of these developments that I had therefore written these articles saying that the Reserve Bank's autonomy must be respected by the government, in the interest of the country
Right.
and in the interest of the government itself. And there is a history we have. We have a long history of the Reserve Bank acting in the country's interests, of its probity, of its integrity, etc. And that is something that must be preserved at all costs.
Right. Mr. Khan, would you echo what you've just heard there from Dr. Rakesh Mohan and the concern that's being raised by RBI Deputy Governor Viral Acharya as well?
No, the points are certainly valid, but I am little intrigued. Why so much of it is happening in the public? I think that is when the country is going through such a difficult phase. I don't know why this public way of coming out so strongly against each other. I'm little intrigued. I think the Reserve Bank autonomy question, no question should be asked about that. Independence is very, very important and critical. But the point is that why it needs to be reiterated in public in so many strong words.
You know, what has happened in public actually is the prompt corrective action debate. This morning we had the DFS, Department of Financial Services Secretary, saying that we are not asking for relaxation. We just want the PCA norms to be the same as international norms. Mr. Garg said the same thing to me 2 days back. Their argument being that the RBI's PCA norms are stricter than international norms. And we already had Viral Acharya in a speech on October 12th saying that on the contrary, Indian PCA norms are not as strict as US norms, where actually the bank can be sold off if it goes below capital thresholds. I mean, he makes a point even about Indian provisioning rules being extremely low compared to the provisioning done by foreign banks. My point is, it looks like the battle on PCA is really gaining ground. That is where both sides, at least on dividend, we didn't have too much by way of a government position. But on public sector banks, prompt corrective action, both sides have expressed opposite points of view. You think this indeed is becoming a battleground?
No, I will again reiterate what has been saying. What points Dr. Acharya has raised are very, very valid points. But my point is that is it the time that we should come out openly and so strongly against each other? Is there no meeting ground on issues on which the national interest is involved? I think we have to keep that national interest in mind. And if you see in publicly we have this strong differences, there must be fundamentally wrong the way the institutions work. Central bank certainly will have a different point of view than government because there's a central bank has a long-term view, government has short-term view. But you see in the 2013 crisis, there was strong coordination. I think that understanding of each other's point of view, I think very, very important. I think that's what I would like to say.
Okay, so you're disheartened. You're disheartened by the fact that both the government and the Reserve Bank seem to be going public with areas of disagreement, and Dr. Mohan agrees with you as well. Dr. Rakesh Mohan and Mr. H.R. Khan, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18 with your analysis on the speech that's just been made by RBI Deputy Governor Viral Acharya, where he has articulated the 3 points that the Reserve Bank sees as ongoing challenges in maintaining the Reserve Bank's independence. We'll take a break. A lot more coming up. Don't go anywhere.